All right, everyone. Thanks for joining today's webinar, Key Success Factors for Enterprise Content Management. My name is Yarin Negri, and I'm from Intlock. And with us as well is Agnes Molnar, who we'll introduce in a few minutes as well. So we'll start out today with a quick introduction, just give you some background about the webinar and also some housekeeping. We'll then dive into our main topic, and then we'll leave some time towards the end for summary and as well as Q&A to answer your questions. First of all, this webinar is being recorded, so if you want to see this afterwards or share it with your colleagues, we'll send to everyone who signed up or joined an email with a link to the webinar recording. We're on Twitter, both Intlock and Agnes, so you can reach us at Cardlog or at Molnar Agnes to tweet with us. And of course, if you do have any questions throughout the webinar, feel free to just send them over through the questions box in the GoToWebinar panel. And as I mentioned earlier, we'll leave some time towards the end of today's webinar to answer all your questions. Joining us today is Agnes Molnar, who is an international SharePoint consultant. She has over 10 years of experience with SharePoint as well as with information architecture and search. Agnes is a SharePoint server MVP, and she's been so for the past 6 years over the course of time where she has been speaking at conferences throughout the world and, of course, has written books, white papers, and has a blog as well that you can check out, and the blog is at the bottom of this slide. So thanks so much for joining us today, Agnes. It's great to have you.
Thank you for inviting me, Yarin. It's my pleasure.
Wonderful. And so with that introduction, I'll hand it over to you.
Thank you. Good afternoon, everyone. And as Yarin mentioned, the topic today is information architecture and enterprise content management and how to be successful in this area, because it's a very important part of SharePoint. So first of all, what we have to talk about is information overload, because definitely I'm pretty sure each of you knows this feeling when we have much more information that we can process, that we can work on, and if we cannot organize this information, if we cannot filter this information, the result will be something like this. But excuse me, I'm very sorry for my voice. I've got some flu, so this is why my voice is not too perfect today. So basically, what is information overload? Information overload can be defined as the situation when the amount of input is bigger than our processing capacity. And it can be a human information overload, it can be, of course, computer information overload. So there are several types of information overload, but yes, we definitely can talk about human information overload as well. The result of information overload is we have less attention to a particular part of the information, or we can process less information than we should. And finally, the result is we either have delay in decision making or we make bad decisions because we couldn't process everything that we should have processed for being able to make good decisions. And it can be very dangerous, and it's a big risk today. But you have to know that information overload is not new, and I'm going to talk about that. But what you have to know is there are some numbers for information overload. And one of them by Robbie Walker says that the average person receives 63,000 words of new information every day. It's a big number. Just to just to make you to be able to imagine this number, Amazon has a statistics, and it says the average length of a novel is about 64,000 words. That means, in average, we get a new book, a new novel of new information every day. It's a huge. Imagine, I have checked some books, and it turned out that the first book of Harry Potter is has about this length. So you get a new book of Harry Potter every day that you have to read and you have to process. It's crazy. And there is one more statistics. It's made by Robbie Walker as well, that if you wanted to read everything you've got this year, it would take the first 3 months of next year. And during this period, you wouldn't do anything else. So it's a crazy number, and it's getting worse and worse. We have more and more information that we have to process somehow. Therefore, organizing the information is more and more important, and analyzing the information is more and more important. So, some history of information overload. In 1970 was the year when the expression information overload was mentioned first by Alvin Toffler, who was a futurologist. But even a couple of years before, Bertram Gross, a social scientist, mentioned the future shock, and he used this expression for the very same thing. Therefore, we can say that in the 1960s, we already had the concept of information overload. But if we do some research, even before in the history, we can see that information overload became a serious problem at the end of the 19th century, when we had more and more new devices and more new ways to store and broadcast information. The first was the telegraph. So before that we had books and we had newspapers printed or written by hand, but broadcasting the information was not as easy as it is today, and not as fast. The problem is with the volume and the velocity of the information. So it's a long, information overload has a very long history if we look back in the time. So after this short introduction, let's talk about enterprise content management, because enterprise content management is a kind of solution for this information overload, and it can be the solution if you do it in the right way. So we have to plan it, and we have to know how to do this. Definitely, obviously, enterprise content management is a content management that is inside the enterprise, inside our business. Therefore, we have the control over it, and we have the ownership over it. In enterprise content management, organizing and accessing the information is very important. And usually the expression I use for this is usability and findability. So we have to be able to find the information, and we have to be able to use the information. And you have to be aware that findability is not about search only, although I'm a search expert, but and I really like to talk about search, but findability is much more than search, because findability can be a good navigation, for example. So if you know how to navigate to a document, you can find it. So the findability of this content is good. But of course, search can be a big help in findability. So besides search, information organization is important. It's very important how you organize your content, how you and when you create your sites, document libraries, lists, even content types, columns, metadata. Everything is very important. In my definition, information architecture is an art and science at the same time. And it is the art and science of organizing and labeling the content. The content can be a document, a website, a blog post, a wiki, a page, database entry, anything. And the goal of information architecture, as I said, is supporting findability and usability of the information. So basically, if I wanted to tell the same with pictures, the goal is to go from this kind of information architecture that is really not an architecture to this. And we have a lot of tools for this in SharePoint, even in the previous versions, but in SharePoint 2013 those tools became much intense and much improved and much better. So what kind of tools and what kind of features we have in SharePoint? First of all, we have document libraries and folders. We have lists, and we can put our content into those libraries and into those lists. And also we can create folders and subfolders, so we can create a kind of hierarchy under our libraries and lists. And in this hierarchy can be a kind of organization, a kind of architecture of our content. But it's not really more than storing our documents in a file share. So everyone knows file shares. We can create folders and we can put everything there. Every company has big file shares. So if you just think about the document libraries and folders, they can be a kind of representation of file shares. But of course SharePoint has much more than this. And if it has much more, we should use those additional functionalities. So first of all, of course, we have metadata. We have columns in both our lists and our libraries. And those columns can be the properties, the metadata of the content. So for example, the title is a column. Status can be a column. Product ID, customer name, project information, everything can be a column, everything can be a property in SharePoint. Besides this, besides the columns, we can create content types. With content types, we define the types of different content. So for example, we can have a content type for contracts or for sales presentations, or a contact information about the person can be a content type as well. A task is a content type. An event is a content type in SharePoint. And each of those content types define several things. First of all, they define the columns assigned to this content type. So for example, an event has some dates, when the event starts and when it finishes. It might have some locations. It might have a list of people who have been invited. But a task have different attributes, different properties, different columns. A task has a column, who is this task assigned to, when it should be done, when it should get started, etc., etc. And the same is true for document content types. So for example, if we define a content type for contracts, this means this contract have several properties like the customer ID, the customer name, the date of the contract, the person who signed this contract, etc., etc. So you get the picture. The content type defines the properties that related to this content type. In case of documents, The content types also defines the template that should be used with this content type. So, for example, again, in case of contracts, when you create a new contract, it can be based on a contract template that you define in advance. So you create this template, you assign this template to the content type, contract, and as soon as someone creates a new contract in the SharePoint document library, this template will be used immediately. So users don't have to start from an empty document. But content types also define workflows assigned to them and some policies as well, so they are very complex structure and they are very useful. The next thing I have to mention as an information architecture tool or feature in SharePoint is document sets. Document sets have been introduced in SharePoint 2010, but they are improved in SharePoint 2013. Basically, what we talk about here is a collection, a set of documents that we can manage together. For example, you can start a workflow to the whole document set instead of just starting it on the pieces, on the separate documents. So for example, if you have a contract with some additional documents, you can approve the whole contract, the whole document set in once. We have also managed metadata. Managed metadata is a term set, a term store. You can define your own taxonomy, a hierarchical taxonomy. You can use this, you can assign this as a property to your list items or documents in SharePoint. And actually managed metadata is very good. I really like using it because it gives a structure itself, because it's hierarchical, it's predefined, and it can be used even for navigation in SharePoint 2013. So it's a very, very strong and very good feature. Of course, you don't have to use it everywhere, but there are a lot of scenarios when managed metadata is a very good or the best solution. So once again, you can define a hierarchy of your taxonomies. You can tag your documents with those predefined tags, and they can be multilingual. You can define synonyms for them, abbreviations. So they are very, very strong and very useful. We also have document IDs in SharePoint. That means a unique ID can be assigned to each document, and this ID doesn't change when you move the document to another library in the site collection. So for example, if during the document lifecycle you move the document from one library to another library, it's not a problem anymore, because based on the document ID, SharePoint assigns a URL to the document that stays the same. So even if you move the document, the URL of this document doesn't change. It stays the same. The document keeps this URL, and it's very important when you send out emails and you alert your colleagues, you notify your colleagues, hey, this is a document, please check it, please review it, I would like to get your feedback. And you know, if the document's URL changes, those URLs in those emails will be broken, so your colleagues won't access the document. But with document ID, you can avoid this problem, and you can use a permanent URL for your documents. We also have workflows. That is very, very important, because you can define your business processes in SharePoint, your business process representations in SharePoint, and they can help a lot. They can put new tags into your documents. They can change the status of your document. They can move your documents around. So it's very important. And also we have a content organizer rules in SharePoint that it can be also important if it's implemented in the right way. Content organizer rules basically are responsible to move the document to a final location based on the document's property. So you have a big drop-off library in a central drop-off library. You put your documents there, and when the properties of this document will be filled in by a user or by some process automatically, this document can be moved into the proper library. So for example, if you have a tag for geographic locations, you can say, alright, if this document is tagged by Boston or New York City, this document should be moved to North America because Boston and New York City are in North America. But if the document is tagged with London, this document should be moved to the European document library because London is in the United Kingdom and United Kingdom is in Europe. And you can define these rules, and these rules can be based on the properties, the content types, and even on manage metadata. So you can define this kind of hierarchical rules. So basically those are the most important features and tools in SharePoint 2013. And now let me show you some examples and good and bad practices, how to use them and how not to use them, what to avoid. So how you can be successful, because it's I believe that it's very important to talk about what to do, but it's also very important to talk about what not to do and how not to do those things. So the first thing I'm going to talk about is the sites, libraries, lists, and folders in SharePoint. So those are the basic content organizing tools in SharePoint. Those things, sites, libraries, lists, and folders, can be defined in several ways and can be created in several ways. So first of all, what we have to, or at least what we should consider, is the business needs. So what are the business needs? What the company, the customer, or your department, your enterprise really needs. What, for example, if you know that you would like to organize your content by departments, it's a good practice to create sites for each department. But if you are a project company, it might be a good practice to create a separate site for each project. It really depends on your company, so there is not a silver bullet. I cannot tell you you have to create sites if, because, or when, because it always depends on your business needs. The next thing is IT restrictions. IT sometimes is considered as the bad guy in a company, although they always have a good intent, of course, so we have to respect it. For example, there might be some rules that where and how you can create sites, or of course there are some technical limitations, so it's not a good practice to create thousands of sites under one site collection, and all those kind of things are technical or IT restrictions, and we have to respect them. We also should have a governance plan and it's also good practice, and those tools should be created by the governance plan. So if you do not have a governance plan, it would be really good to consider it, because maybe your SharePoint environment is small today, but I'm pretty sure it's growing and growing, and as it's growing, it will be harder and harder to maintain it and to rule it, and if you don't have those rules and policies and responsibilities, it will be harder and harder, and you might end having a lot of problems with SharePoint, even if it has good basics today. Unfortunately, I can see a lot of companies, I can still see a lot of companies creating sites and folders and libraries like randomly. Meaning, if someone would like to store something in SharePoint, the first thing is to create a new folder, or in even worse case, a new document library. I have to upload the pictures of my cat into SharePoint, so I create a new document library. Oh, I have a new baby, I'm creating a new document library. Oh, we had a party last night with a couple of colleagues, let's create a new picture library for that. It's not always a good practice. So I have seen several SharePoint environments where this approach, creating everything in a big freedom, drove the SharePoint environment to be totally useless, because it had a lot of mess and a lot of useless content in a crazy, unstructured site and document library architecture. So, I'm sorry. So, some practices, what to avoid. So basically, this is not what we want to achieve with our SharePoint. And with document libraries and lists and folders and even documents, we have some bad naming conventions, and unfortunately still a lot of people use these. So for example, the name of the document is document1.docx. It's obviously not a good practice, because the name of the document doesn't mean anything, and I cannot tell what this document is about. So it's not good from findability perspective, it's not good from search perspective, it's not good at all. So the name of the document should be a descriptive one. The second bad naming example is naming the library like Joe Library. So naming a library about the person who has created this library. So I have seen those libraries like Joe Library 1, Joe Library 2, and Joe Library 100. It doesn't mean anything. And after a while, it doesn't mean anything even for the author, the creator of those libraries, because it's impossible to remember which library is what for. And the same is creating lists or libraries with the names of list 1 and library 1 and those kind of things. So you get the picture. If you create a document library, or if you create a list, if you upload a document in SharePoint, into SharePoint, give it a descriptive name, a good name that means something for the people and not only for you. Next bad example is when we do not have structure. So when you create, for example, a team site, it has a shared documents library. And a lot of people upload everything into the shared documents. That means you might end having thousands of documents in these shared document libraries, and it's not really good. And there is one more bad practice, and we have to be careful about this. is when we create or upload content in the wrong place. So for example, when you upload your marketing campaign presentation for 2013 into the 2012 folder, or if you put some documentation about customer 1 into the customer 2 site. It's not good from finally it's not good from security perspective at all. So for example, there might be some users who have access to customer 2 site, but they don't need to, they shouldn't know anything about customer 1. So we have to be very careful with these problems. So let's see some good examples and some best practices. As I said, naming is very important. The title is one of the most important properties of everything. Title is the first thing that the users can see. Title is the most important property in the ranking models of search. It should include the product, the customer name, so some information about the content. It should include the intent of the document. So obviously the title should not be too long, but at least it should include some information about the intent, about the goal of the document, and about the customer, the product, or any artifact it's related to. We should structure our information. So separate lists, document libraries, or folders, maybe separate sites for the separate things. Of course, not without any control. So governance is important. We have to define the policies when users can create sites, even if they have permissions to, when they can create libraries or lists, and when they should create folders. And in these policies, we have to define the naming convention as well. And sometimes we have to check, we have to analyze our structure, and we should keep it clean. So we should really check the naming, we should really check the structure, we have to check the content that is in SharePoint, and sometimes we have to do some cleanups for this. The next thing is the descriptors of the content types, the columns, the management data of SharePoint. Again, we have some business needs, we have some IT restrictions or technical boundaries, we have governance plans, and also sometimes they are created randomly. So when a user would like to tag something with something, for example the pictures with the name of the dogs, the users usually create a new column for dog names or something like that. So, and those are real stories. So those are real customer stories. Every example I use today. So again, some don't do. Again, bad naming, Joe content type, or tag 1, value 1, 2, 3, or those kind of things are not good at all. Or pause column. This is not good. Bad structure can drive us to have duplicates. So for example, in case of content types, technically it's very easy to create a new content type. But if you don't think about it, if you don't plan it, the content type hierarchy can be in fact flat. So if after a while we might have hundreds of content types without any hierarchy, and it drives us to have a mess. And also if we have a term store, we might have in the term store, in case of management data, we can allow the users to enter new terms into the term store. But this is good because they can expand the term store. But at the same time, we have to control it because they can enter anything there. Therefore, we might be having huge term stores with no real hierarchy and with a lot of random terms and dead terms. So again, just keep it clean. And the solution is not to make every column to be obligatory, required, because people, unfortunately, and I'm sorry for using this word, but people are lazy. So if we make a column to be required, a property to be required, people will enter ABC 1, 2, 3 or 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, or they will choose the default value, or they will just enter some random value. So this is not the solution. We really have to create the policies, and it's all about psychology. This is what I say, metadata psychology. So we have to motivate the people to use the environment in the right way. Again, the naming convention, we have to have a naming convention in our governance plan. So, for example, a content type can be marketing campaign template, or a term in the term store can be Europe. Under Europe, we might have a new term, United Kingdom, and under United Kingdom, we might have a third term for London. And with this, we have a clean and nice term hierarchy. We have to have these hierarchies for content type, for manage metadata, and it's a very good way to keep our structure clean is to use side columns instead of creating and defining new columns on each document library. So it might worth consider to turn everything, or at least the majority of the columns, to be side column. After this, enterprise content management, worst and best practices. Let me talk about the enterprise search to improve the findability a bit. In my definition, search is a technology that your organization owns and controls, and enterprise search connects people to the information they need to get their jobs done. So we have a kind of connection between the people and information. And basically this connection can be the search. And as I said, search is one tool to achieve findability, to improve findability. In SharePoint, excuse me, in SharePoint 2013, we have a lot of places and a lot of features in search, and what you can see right now is the default search experience in SharePoint 2013. First, we have a Refinement Panel, as we know already from 2010, but it's much more improved. In 2013, we have deep refiners everywhere. We have new refiner types, and it's very nicely customizable through display templates. Also, we have result types and display templates for the results as well. That means we can define different types of the results and we can display them in different ways. So for example, you can display different properties for contracts than for user manuals or marketing presentations. So it's a very useful new feature. On the right side, you can see the hover panel. When you hover your mouse over a search result, this hover panel will be displayed. And on this hover panel, we can display the properties, the metadata of the document. We can display the preview of the document, the outline of the document, etc., etc. What is highlighted here is the properties of the document because it is very important from the perspective of organizing the content. And this can be customized as well, meaning if you would like to add your custom properties, you can change the display template of the hover panels as well, and it's very easy customization in HTML and JavaScript. And of course we have the query terms and the query rules where you can have your properties. And as you can see, and you should see that everything in search is metadata driven. And I was talking about information architecture, and I was talking about the properties of the documents and organization of the documents, and everything that describes a content, a piece of content in SharePoint is a metadata. And from search perspective, it's very important that we might have several crawled properties. Crawled properties are the properties that can be extracted. In case of SharePoint, those are the properties that can be gotten from the document libraries and lists. Those are the SharePoint properties from the search perspective. And managed properties are the properties that we use on the search user interface. As refiners, we can display them on the result set, on the hover panel, we can sort the results by them, we can use them in the ranking model, etc., etc. And it's very important to separate them. So we have the properties in the content, in the document libraries, in lists, and we have the properties for search, and those are the managed properties, and we can map them and we can customize them. So for example, if you have different names for the same meaning of the property, you can map them into the same managed property, and from this there will be normalized from the search perspective. But everything here requires a lot of gardening, as I usually say. So you have to be there, you have to check your environment, and you have to work on this continuously. You have to keep improving your environment. So this is the point when I'm giving it back to Yarin.
Yeah, thank you.
Who will show you how to analyze your content.
Perfect. Thanks, Agnes. Thanks for sharing those insightful tips around how we can improve enterprise content management. We're getting to the last stretch here before we open up for some questions. And again, to remind you, if you do have any questions, feel free to send them through the GoToWebinar questions panel. So just to kind of talk about how analytics ties into what Agnes has been talking up till now, and really why do we need analytics in the scheme of things. So what we see is that while lots of organizations do use the insights that Agnes has shared, do build up their content management in a way that is built for success, we have many unknowns around our portal, around our content management system, and we're not sure to say if the different goals that we define and the way that we want to build our content management systems are really happening. So we're not sure to say who's actually using the portal and actually what's being used within our environment and what's not being used, what are folks actually searching for, and so forth. And so the idea behind analytics and the way it ties in is we can actually answer many of these unknowns. That would be one of the keys here. And this is a never-ending cycle. The first step is really evaluate and really do some of the items that Agnes had mentioned and define our goals for our content management system or for our portal. The next step is to constantly monitor the usage of the environment. And then finally, if those two aren't in line, we want to go back, enhance, and improve our environment to make sure that it is giving our employees and our users the highest benefit. So this continuous cycle of improvement, we see that analytics is a key step here to really understand how the portal is being used. I want to share just a few ideas, give you a few ideas of metrics you can use today as a way to benchmark and find out if your portal is achieving the goals and is doing what you built it out to do. So the first metric, of course, is to identify top users who are actually using the portal the most. And with that, the next and very easy actionable step is to turn them into SharePoint evangelists within their department. So if we are talking about things like adding metadata or naming lists in the right way, if we have these evangelists within different departments, instead of having one person from the governance team hovering over everyone, making sure everyone uses things like metadata and so forth, we have these evangelists within each department who can help other users with things like metadata, like giving the right titles and so forth. On the other hand, as opposed to top users, we can very easily with analytics identify users who are not using the portal as often. Maybe different users or different groups of users, and then of course provide them with training. Maybe they don't know how to use the portal. Maybe they're not sure how to add things like metadata and so forth. So once we're able to identify who the users are, we can go back and make sure they know how to use all the tools that Agnes was talking about earlier in the webinar. Mobile trends. Do we have lots of users accessing the data through their mobile devices? So Agnes was talking about findability. Maybe one of the challenges is that everything is linked to properly and search is working well, but our portal isn't being displayed in a good way on mobile devices. And so once we're able to identify these different mobile trends, we can go back and create a mobile strategy that's in line with that and actually create things like mobile apps and so forth to make sure that we're able to provide our users with the content in the way that they want to access it. I was talking about search. So of course, very easy to pull up a report around failed search phrases. Is everyone searching for the same document? In which case, search might not be the answer there, but rather a link, as Agnes mentioned. We just need a top 10 links to some of our most popular content. And so once we can identify these failed searches, we can add content that's missing to a site and things of that sort. And then finally, is there content that is just laying around? So of course, if we perhaps mistitle something or put a document in a site that it shouldn't belong and so forth, is there a lot of content that we're not actually accessing? And then of course we can remove it if it's not needed, or if it is needed but in the wrong place, very easy. Once you know that it's not being used, that it is in the wrong place, very easy to go back and put it in a place where it will be easier to access by our users. So that's the first pillar you see here on the next slide, which is monitoring the actual usage. And if we talk about the third step, also enhance, I showed you on the left-hand side the metrics, and on the right-hand side we saw the actions we can take to enhance our portal. And then the third pillar you see here is actually engaging users. So what we want to do is make sure that we can actually be proactive and ask our users to use the portal what's working for them, what are their pain points. For example, I just mentioned that if we define that too many columns are mandatory, people might get lazy and just fill out information that doesn't really make sense. But if they can give us feedback and let us know, listen, this column isn't needed, I'm just filling in or keeping it blank, we can use that feedback to constantly improve our portal. And so the idea is to how can we actually engage our users. And so the idea is here we provide two ways. One is a message bar. We can actually display messages at the top of our browser to our users. And the other is through a survey tool where we can actually engage users with different surveys and questions and actually ask them, how's the portal going for them? Is metadata helping them? And really all these questions we want answered. And as opposed to passing out a survey at the end of the month or a few weeks later, we can actually get this feedback in real time as our users are actually using SharePoint. So the idea is to constantly be able to ask our users exactly how they're using the portal and how it's working for them. So we're almost at the end of our hour. I think about 10 to. I want to make sure we have some time to answer any of your questions. I do see that we have a few questions in the question box, but of course if you have any other questions, feel free to pass them along as well, and we'll make sure that we have time for those questions. Let's take a look, Agnes. There are the first question is talking about information architecture. You talked about labeling content. If you could go over again, how do you suggest labeling the content?
How to labeling the content. Basically, my first suggestion is to use as few labels as possible, because the more we have, the risk of having people not to fill in those labels is getting bigger. Also, there are some tools for creating those labels automatically. If you have a huge amount of content, it might be worth to take a look at on those tools. And also when you create your content by some automatic jobs. For example, if you use some automatic scanning solutions or any jobs that put a huge amount of content in SharePoint, it's a good practice to label those documents automatically as good as you can. Of course, defining the rules and all those stuff for those automatic labeling is a big task at the beginning, but it's worth. And even if you do manual labeling, as I said, to create as few labels as it's possible, and you should figure out how to motivate your users to put the correct labels into this. One good example is to create a kind of board of your users and to highlight the users who do a good job in tagging and labeling and all those information architecture things. The other way I have seen and I have done several times is to create choose one site, for example, label everything in the best way there as you can, of course with involving the key users of this site, and then create a nice and fancy and very, very good search for this site only, with all the refiners, with customized hover panel, with customized result types and display templates and everything, just to be able to show the benefits. Hey, if you label, if you tag your content in the right way, this is what you get in search, and this is what you get in findability, and this is how it will help you. So this is what I usually call to be a golden site or the golden set of content. So so once again, choose a small or smaller set of content, do your best to tag and label everything there, and then highlight the benefits, what you can get from it.
Okay, perfect. So some great tips around that. Another question here. Let's take a look. Lucy's asking, you gave some great ideas about 2013 search. We're still on SharePoint 2010. What are your thoughts about search there? Or I guess she's asking how different is it from 2013?
The difference is, I would say, big enough. It also depends if you use faster to SharePoint or the plain SharePoint 2010 search engine. A lot of things can be done there as well. So for example, metadata management in search is almost the same in 2010. That means you can create your refiners, you can highlight some properties, you can make the content being able to found by properties. So from this perspective, you have a lot of benefits even in SharePoint 2010. when you are ready to migrate or upgrade to 2013, I would consider a search first migration. When you set up a service farm for search only in 2013, and you can use, from this point, you can use the benefits of the new 2013 search features, even if you have all your content on 2010. Then you can crawl that and you can use it, and it's a very common scenario to move search first into 2013.
Okay, perfect. So I think that's the questions we have for today. So for now, Agnes, I'll thank you for joining us, and of course everyone who logged on, thank you as well. And Agnes, even though you're sick, we're very happy that you're able to join us today.
Thank you very much. The pleasure is on my side. Thank you very much.
Yeah, absolutely. And of course, everyone who joined will be sending out an email probably by tomorrow with both the link to the recording as well as the slide deck, so you get all of this as well. So I hope everyone has a great day. And again, thanks for joining.